Hello, welcome to the ELEX webinar, Modeling and Encoding Serials in BIBFRAME, Session 5 in the series From MARC to BIBFRAME. I'm Holly Tomrin, a member of the ELEX Continuing Education Committee. I will be your host for today's webinar. Our presenter today is Gloria Gonzalez. Gloria is the library strategist at Zephyra. As part of the Library Link Network team, Gloria helps academic and public libraries, archives, and rare book libraries incorporate linked data principles into their work. Previously, she was the digital archivist at UCLA Library Special Collections and a junior fellow at the Library of Congress. Gloria holds a master's degree in Library and Information Science from UCLA. There are a few things to keep in mind for today's presentation. All attendees are muted. If you have questions for Gloria, please type them into the question box on your screen, and she will answer them at the end of the presentation. Our software does not have interactive chat capabilities. You may use the ELEX hashtag if you wish to use Twitter to comment on today's presentation. The hashtag is ALCTSCE. We do not monitor the Twitter feed, so please use the question box to submit questions and comments. This webinar is being recorded, and you will receive an email with links to the recording and presentation slides. And now here's Gloria. There will be a slight delay as we change presenters.
Hi, Holly, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, Gloria.
Okay, great. I apologize for that delay. My WebEx quit on me, and I just had to restart it.
Okay.
Okay, great. Are you able to see my slides?
They came up briefly, but then we can't see them anymore.
Okay,
here we go. Mm-hmm.
Perfect. Thank you for the introduction, and thanks to everybody for joining us today in this session of the ELEX series From MARC to BIBFRAME. Because of time limits, I won't be going into the basics of linked data or BIBFRAME, but if you're interested in that, then I encourage you to go see the first few webinars in this series so that you can learn more. And of course, if you have any questions, if I happen to skip over something and you need more information, then you can go ahead and put that in chat for us to talk about after I finish. Now, before I dig into things, I'd like to start with a quick spoiler alert. I won't be giving basically a how-to guide on how to catalog or publish linked data for serials because BIBFRAME's ability to accommodate serials is currently still unresolved. There's been a lot of work put into this, however, and that's what I'm going to be talking about today. There's a lot of issues when it comes to catalog or using BIBFRAME for serials, but many experts on serials cataloging are experimenting with linked data, both locally and on larger scales, and they're working to figure out how serials should be best modeled and encoded in BIBFRAME. So today I'm going to overview a few things. I'm going to give you an overview of the things we're going to talk about today. So I'm going to begin with some ongoing efforts to map serials to BIBFRAME. And then I'm going to talk about some of the issues that have come up and the things that these groups are raising. And this is all things they've learned while using the BIBFRAME model and vocabulary. And then I'll talk about a possible model for MARC to BibFrame serials conversion and give you an example of what that may look like. And after that, I'll talk about tools, cataloging tools for original cataloging in a BibFrame environment. And then lastly, I'm going to finish up with a few tips on how you can get involved. And after that, we'll get to questions. So there are many efforts ongoing to map serials to BibFrame and BibFrame to other ontologies. Today I'm going to talk about just two, and these are primarily focused in North America, but are both thinking globally as well as they go through and do this. So there's a group under the PCC BibFrame task group, and then there's also Zafira's training alumni serials team. And so there are some overlaps in the membership of these groups, but they've been working pretty hard to go through and map serials details to BibFrame and consider all of those issues that are involved. So there are many parts of the PCC BibFrame task group. They are focusing on different initiatives besides just mapping serials materials. They're looking into the definition of work and how people look at different ideas of definitions of a work amongst different communities. And they're also looking at how URIs should be included in MARC so that linked data is really rich once you convert the legacy data. But today I'm not going to focus on the work of those task groups. I'm just going to talk about the work of the group that's focused on transforming or serials using BibFrame. And so they've been working to map CSR to BibFrame, and if you want more information, I've included this link in my slides that you can go to later. And they have they've been working building off of work done by a previous concert group, but it got folded into the PCC group so that they could all work together. But I'm going to talk about a little bit of the issues that they've raised today, like enumeration and chronology data and how BibFrame expresses that, and other things. And then secondly, there's Zafira's training alumni serials team. So this group was started by participants who went through Zafira's linked data training, and the group was founded by Tina Schrader at NLM and Xiaoli Li at UC Davis. And so since the group was founded, Zafira no longer offers training, but the group continues to work, and the training materials are no longer updated, but they're available for anybody who wants them. So this is just an informal learning group created by all of the people who had that shared experience of the training. But they originally met bi-weekly for a while this year, and then they are now transitioning into monthly meetings. So what they've done so far is compared Presso-O, BibFrame 1.0, and BibFrame Lite. And so they also transformed example sets of records into linked data. So each person took about under 100 records from their particular institution, transformed them, and analyzed the results. And that work is continuing. So they're providing feedback on the vocabulary and the transformation rules. So for that transformation work, they're providing feedback on vocabulary on BibFrame Lite and how it matches with BibFrame in general. And then they're also comparing Presso-O to see how that can address some of the issues that come up when you're working with BibFrame and serials. So now I'm going to talk about a few issues that catalogers, serials catalogers encounter while using the BibFrame model and vocabulary. There are many issues. Today I'm going to focus on 3. But at the end, I'm going to provide you with a few resources that if you're interested in reading further, you can go to learn more about the other issues. So I'm going to begin by talking about enumeration and chronology, which is an issue that Xiaoli Li has focused on in both the serials team and other arenas like the PCC group. I'm also going to talk about interoperability as an issue and how we need to think about interoperability when approaching the BibFrame model and serials. And then lastly, I'm going to talk about an issue that's seen in changing information, because just by the basic nature of serials, some things change. So for example, if a publisher were to be consumed by another publisher, or if a serial moves on to another publisher. So you want to track both that change, but the previous name and the most recent name and things like that. So what's promising is that Press.oo, it was created for this purpose, to create an international model to work with serials. And so if that was incorporated into the work that we're doing with BibFrame, then it could solve some of those issues. So let me get into enumeration and chronology. I'm going to go through a few different MARC fields and how enumeration and chronology is expressed, and then show you what that would look like in BibFrame. And I'm going to be using BibFrame 2.0 in these examples. So to start with, we have two title fields, the 246 and 247. So if you were to break those down, starting with the 246 field in subfield F, we'll find that date January 1997. And so in a MARC perspective, that's just one string, but in BibFrame it breaks down, and you can see that here we have the title with the label, Office Management Series. So subfield A becomes the label, and then subfield F becomes the date there. And then similarly in 247, if you have your subfield F here that expresses the volumes, then you would attach that to the BibFrame instance. And so the name of this magazine is here as the label, and then this is put into the notes field. So here it can be instance date, and then the volumes here are notes. And once I go through all of these, I'll show you a table that expresses all of them. So when it comes to the notes fields, there are many places where enumeration and chronology may appear. So I'm going to go through some of these formatted and both unformatted to show you how that breaks down in BibFrame. So for example, the 362 field, you have these formatted notes here. And so subfield A can become BibFrame first issue, and then that second part would be last issue. However, in the MARC record, you'll see that this is a string, and it's all one subfield. So any type of data processing that would take place to break it down into both the first issue and last issue would need to make some type of definition to use either punctuation or another extraction method to assign it to the right value. So secondly, we have unformatted notes, and so the more unformatted notes become, the harder they are to work with in BibFrame, especially when you're trying to make them machine defined, so actionable, because notes are rich with many different types of information that could really be broken down in a granular way, but it's not easy. So for this 362 field, you see it written out incomplete in a complete format. And so what's in purple there in the first example would be BibFrame first issue, and what's in blue at the end would be last issue. However, there's another option for how this may look like in BibFrame, and that's just putting it together as a note. But as I explained earlier, it would be more actionable if it was broken down like this. So that's how it stands now with some notes, and then I'll go on to 310 and 321. So these subfield B's of frequencies break down into BibFrame frequency attached to the instance. So you have your frequency becoming a value attached to the instance with a date. And those are color coordinated as well. Excuse me. So the last part of notes that I'm going to talk about are the 5XX fields. I'm sorry, hold on one second. We have the 515 as well as the 5888. And so these notes would also be attached to the instance, and they would be expressed like this in BIBFRAME. So to give you an overview of all of the places where enumeration and chronology appear, here's the table. And so on the left you have the MARC field numbers, and then on the right you have how it breaks down in BIBFRAME. But just looking at this table can bring up a lot of questions. And so some of the ones that Xiaoli has brought up is, should we create a uniform way of encoding enumeration and chronology data at the instance level? Because you can see that it can happen many ways. So should that be done in a uniform way instead of all these different options? Or is it just that the flexibility of BIBFRAME should be utilized and kind of do it multiple ways? And it also brings up the fact that BIBFRAME right now as it stands may not be as sufficiently granulated, or it doesn't have the granularity that it needs to express all of the rich data that are simply being thrown in notes right now. And so from the BIBFRAME perspective, there has been a lot done, and you can currently use the vocabulary to work with serials, but there are steps that we can take in the future to help make it better. So the second issue I'm going to talk about is interoperability. And so I'm talking about the interoperability of BIBFRAME from multiple perspectives. So first and foremost, you have the machine perspective. And so we want BIBFRAME to be interoperable with all types of RDF standards and platforms and linked data applications. So that library data doesn't have to be used only in our own arena. It can be used throughout industries on platforms that are available to all types of devices that may utilize RDF. So when you think of machine interoperability, I want to use a quick metaphor. So you always have your human-friendly data, so that would be data that's interoperable with humans reading it and being able to interpret it. But when you have machine interoperable data, it's optimized for machines. And so when we talk about BIBFRAME and we talk about linked data, we always have to keep in mind that it's machine optimized. And so the whole reason it was created was to make library data interoperable via machines and actionable in all types of new ways. So we have to, when we think of this, we have to think of both machine interoperability, but then also how the standard interacts with the people in our communities. So things like user experience studies and other things kind of layer on top of the actual work with linked data. And so when you're modeling for machine optimization. There's also interoperability with ontologies and vocabularies. Let me go back here. So like I mentioned Presso earlier, but if another group, if another international group has already done a lot of work to address the specific needs of serials and done so in like a long-standing way from a special perspective, then BIBFRAME and those who are working with it shouldn't have to kind of recreate the wheel. Instead, it's best to use all of the things that have already been done to save energy and both to make it interoperable with all of the other things that are based on Presso O. And Presso O is not alone. There are other vocabularies such as the ONIX for serials coverage statement and things like the enumeration and chronology of periodicals ontology that can also be considered when pushing the way BibFrame fits with serials forward. There's also interoperability with models and standards. Another issue that's been raised is that BibFrame doesn't map directly to Ferber, but in the case of serials, that can actually be very beneficial. And so there's also the really important need to take into account things like RDA, and thankfully the Library of Congress has done a great job at that. But the mapping activities that have been done by the PCC mapping group, serials mapping group, as well as the Zafira group really helps to point out where those gaps are and where they're not currently interoperable. And then before I move on to the next big issue, I wanted to talk about interoperability with MARC, which some may find surprising because BibFrame is supposed to take the place of MARC. But that process is not going to happen overnight, as we've seen over the past few years. And so BibFrame does need to interoperate with MARC in a way that we can transform MARC into BibFrame and take BibFrame data and transform it to MARC if it needs to be used in those systems. So that's something really important that we need to take in mind when kind of seeking answers to these questions, because we must think about how BibFrame is used and how we would like it to be used in a perfect world, but at the same time we have a lot of rich legacy data that we've put a lot of money into creating and will continue to be used for quite a while that we need to address as well. So the last thing in this section is the issue of changing information. So on this slide you see a list of just a few things that change for serials over time, like frequency, publisher, I like the frequency twice, title, things like that. And so the fact that this information changes is not surprising to the experts in this field of serials cataloging, because it's really inherent to the type of material that are considered to be serials. And so because of the nature of these materials, all of these things change, but it's not straightforward, even though BibFrame and linked data in general is flexible and can really do a great job of tracking things like title histories. It's not straightforward way to model it immediately, and so it's going to take iteration for people to figure out how to best address this type of thing and how to track it and connect the triples properly, but then also how to display it to users. And so hopefully over the next few years or so we'll be able to address not just changing information but enumeration and chronology and interoperability as well. So for the next portion of my presentation I'm going to talk about a possible model for MARC to BibFrame serials conversion. And I'm just going to simply talk about the model that I'm most familiar with from my work, but I'll try and fit it into a larger context for those of you who may not have tracked the evolution of BibFrame experimentation after the first vocabulary draft was created. So I'm going to talk about an example from the Library Link Network, and in order to do that I'm going to break down how the Library Link Network works before I dig into the specific example. So I work with the Library Link Network through Zafira, and it's created of a group of partners. So we work with companies like Circe Dynex, Innovative Interfaces, and EBSCO Novelist, as well as Atlas Systems, to partner with libraries to transform their MARC records into linked data. And so through that we've been taking a general approach and transforming entire catalogs. So MARC data is our primary method of transformation, but we've started to do experimentation and describe library events, as well as archives and special collections. But we take the source MARC data and we transform it into BibFrame. And then once all of those links are created, there's an interlinking process. So some of you who are familiar with linked data may know this as reconciliation. Sometimes I call this folding, but essentially it matches all of the same entities within the library's data set and combines those links together and does all the cross-linking within their own graph. Then we publish the data using multiple vocabularies. So we do use BibFrame, but we also use schema.org, Open Graph, Dublin Core, and it's all licensed to the library using Creative Commons license. And so once it's published in all of those different types of vocabularies, it can be consumed on the web. And so it can be consumed really in two main different types of ways. Once it's published, it can be ingested by search engines, but it can also be directly consumed now that the data is in this linked data format. So examples of that would be third parties or apps, different types of gadgets, and in library applications. The last step in the process is iteration, and so we right now publish, for some libraries we refresh it every month, for others we refresh bi-weekly, but we take their new set of MARC data and transform it again. And so through that process we're able to update and include any changes. So for example, if the serials team made a suggestion about the vocabulary and we tweaked it a little bit, then it would be included in all of the refreshes for the next span. And so essentially we take MARC data and an XML format and we transform it into triples. So here's the under the hood of what one format of what that looks like. So now that we've reviewed that simple overview of the process, I'm going to talk about one test example. So this is theoretical. It's just a small experiment that I did for this presentation. So it's not open and available online. It's just on my local computer, but I can provide you all with some links to other live examples from other libraries. What you see here is just a small set of records from the National Library of Medicine published in the Library Link Network environment. So you see all of their location information, where they're located. You can see on the right a list of different BibFrame resources that were created from the actual data. So before I move forward, I'll explain that if you go back to that credit card metaphor that I reviewed, so this web page here that you're viewing is really the human-friendly version of this data, and so it's just human-friendly and it's not optimized for machines. But this data that I showed you here, the actual links, are machine optimized, and so those are just embedded onto these pages. So a machine can consume that data, and meanwhile humans can navigate it. So for the remainder of the example, I'm going to stick to the human-friendly stuff instead of this format of data. So if this was an actual live example, then a possible link domain or a domain that all of the data could be published on would be something like link.nlm.nih.gov. An actual live example would be from Boston University, and you can go to that and see their page, their link domain page, and that you can find that at link.bu.edu. So back to this page, if I were to just go down and click on series, then I can see a list or an index here. And if I were to click on management series, for example, published in Ann Arbor, Michigan, you can see that it's linked to 11 items in that series. And then on the right, you can see all of those members. So essentially, what you're seeing here is just created from a series of relationships that have been created with links. And so by making those definitions during the linked data transformation, you can kind of aggregate different series or or group other types of continuing resources or serials. So if I were to click on one of these 7 strategies to improve your bottom line, you can see that there's linked data here from both the BibFrame work and the BibFrame instance. But you can think of this really kind of as an item page. And then on your right, you have subjects, or as they're known in BibFrame, concepts that are also linked to this same entity. And you can also see that these pages are linked to each other because from this page you can get back to this page as well. And that's just all done from the raw data. At the bottom of this page, you will notice that it's also connected to the library location as well as other links that lead back to the library. So if I were to look at this series, for example, here, you'll see that it's set up in a similar way. Now during the transformation process, we do go through and do interlinking, so all of the links are connected to the library itself, but there's also a cross-linking process that goes on. So if you happen to be digging into the Boston University example after this, you can click this link analysis portion at the bottom and see how it's connected to other libraries. And then if you want to get back to those triples that I showed you in raw form, then you can click the raw data button on the bottom right to get to that data. So here's just another example. And so again, what you're viewing is just the relationships created between different entities displayed in a human-friendly form. And this also works with multiple languages. So this is something that the Zafira's serials team has really focused on. In their examples, they tried to give, their transformation examples, they tried to give a series of data from all different languages to see how it would be connected and displayed. So here's one example and another Russian example. And so what you're viewing here is just all the work data listed on the work page, which you can see is connected to both the item page and the instance. You all may be interested in some of those subjects or concepts that I pointed out earlier. So here is just one subject that could be connected to a serial, and how you can see underneath that there's multiple authority links. And so you are able to create all of those relationships, and if the links happen to be in the subfield 0 of the MARC, then they'll be connected. So now I'm going to just review a few tools for cataloging serials in a BibFrame environment. I'm going to go over 2. I'm going to start with the Library of Congress's BibFrame Editor, and then I'm going to follow up with Zafira's Scribe. So the Library of Congress's BibFrame Editor is currently in a state where it will be updated, and if you want more information about that, you can visit the first the webinar in this series, and that's a free webinar. So it's complimentary, and they talk more about what their plans are for the editor. But as it stands now, there includes profiles with instance. There's also a work profile, and then there's also a profile that includes work and instance information. There's also an editor available so you can create your own profiles. And what's really awesome about the LC BibFrame editor is that it is RDA compliant, and within the interface you can go back to all of the different RDA rules. And if it's available at bibframe.org here, and the link is down at the bottom. So I'm just going to do a quick walkthrough for those of you who may not have used the tool, which, as I mentioned, will be updated with 2.0 in the future, but currently uses 1.0. So that link brings you to this page, and if you were to click on serial, you can see those options that I listed earlier. And so what that takes you into, just for this example, I'll go to the work and instance profile, which is split up into kind of different micro profiles. but on the left you see all of those links to RDA rules, and then on the right you see all of the fields that you can either customize yourself or see that they've formally been created because of the nature of the material you're describing. And so I use the word profile. So a BibFrame profile is just a combination of all of the different elements you'd like to describe connected to a work, for example, or an instance or something else. But they're modular. Some of you may have seen Legos used as examples to explain that. So that's the work. Here's the expression. And so when you're in the tool, this data is just available. I just scrolled down basically. But as you can see, it's very comprehensive. And it's actually been used in the Library of Congress's pilot. So although they haven't started the second phase of their pilot, the catalogers at the Library of Congress use this about once a day to use this tool once a day to kind of keep their skills fresh while they prepare for the next phase of the pilot. So it's really evolved thanks to their feedback from the first pilot and all of their inputs. So this tool really has been put through a lot of testing and use, and it will continue to be put through a lot of different testing and use. So once you scroll down further past the RDA expression information, you'll find the actual BibFrame instance or manifestation in RDA details. And so I'll go ahead and finish the profile, but in general you can see that it's very expansive, and it has kind of represented the granular information that you would need in an original cataloging environment. So this is the end of that profile. So if you were to scroll all the way down, so if you were using it, you could basically take a series that you have at your own institution and fill out all the fields and see how it would work with your workflow. And if you are interested in cataloging workflows and linked data, then I recommend the next of this ELEX series with Xiaoli Li, who will talk about that. So speaking of Xiaoli Li, the next tool I'm going to talk about is Scribe, and Xiaoli Li works at UC Davis, and they worked on the BibFrame project with Zafira to improve Scribe. So Scribe was a prototype originally created for the Library of Congress, but kind of has evolved a lot after that contract ended. And so it's gotten feedback from those people who went through training, and we connected it to more external services like the National Library of Medicine's MESH. But the bulk of the work to improve the tool was done in collaboration with UC Davis. And so I won't go into the entire tool, but I will focus on serials just like I did for the Library of Congress's editor. So if you go to the link provided there, the editor.bibframe.zafira.com /static, or if you just search Zafira Scribe or BibFrame Scribe, it should come up in Google. You'll be brought to this main page. And so you see the series of profiles on the left, and then there's different things like external services that are connected to the tool. If you happen to experiment with this tool yourself and you save a record, you can, and you don't export it, you can find it again just by searching for it here, and it'll pop back up, and you can continue to work on it or export the data at that time. So if I were to scroll down over here on the left, you would see serial, and there's instead of being broken down by instance and work, an item or instance plus work, it's broken down by electronic serial and print serial. So that would be one difference. And then when you actually click on electronic serial, you'll see that there are no RDA rules linked on the left to explain all of the different fields. But essentially, it does go through everything that you would need to describe this type of resource. And what's interesting is that as part of the BibFlow project, there were many relationships added to this profile, which you see on this slide here. So is translation of, is based on, union of, absorbed in part. So all of those things weren't included but they were added through UC Davis's work on this serials profile. So while it is quite a comprehensive and long profile, I haven't done a direct comparison of like the number of fields or anything, but I personally think that the Library of Congress's editor is very, very granular, and this doesn't have as many fields, but that shows just two different approaches, where one is like a little bit more simple but may not meet all of the cataloger's needs. So I've just been kind of pacing through all of these fields here that you would see if you were to scroll down in Scribe. And then at the end, once you're done using the tool, you can press Save and then go back and find it through search again, or you can export the data that you've done, and you can look at that example data. So now I'd just like to talk about a few ways you can get involved both personally or get your institution involved with the evolution of serials and encoding and modeling BibFrame for serials. So my first recommendation is just starting a local study group. And I say a la UCLA because I know UCLA has a study group that contributes to the work of some of the groups that I talked about today. But there were several people there interested in linked data for serials and BibFrame for serials, so they just created their own group, and that group collaborates with others. Things you can do with a local study group include experimenting with Library of Congress's editor and taking serials and using it yourself, just like catalogers are doing at the Library of Congress during the second pilot and the first pilot. You can also use their transformation tool, which if you'd like to learn more about the updates that will be taking place with that, you can go back and listen to that first Library of Congress webinar, but essentially you can take your own local MARC records and transform them and see the results and see if they meet the needs of your collections. And then you could also play with Scribe. And the Scribe, both of these things are open source and available. If you'd like the code, you can find it on GitHub. You could also create a local interest group that supports, so that local group that you would create should definitely be connected to your library's goals and priorities. And if you are working locally, I would just encourage everybody to kind of share what they're learning with the other groups, some of which I've talked today, but just by sharing what you've learned and your recommendations so that everyone can work together and we can all take advantage of what everyone else is doing. You can also, if you're interested, join Zafira's alumni team. And so if you're interested in that, you can contact either Tina or Shali or myself with questions. Or if you don't have any questions and you'd just like to join, then you can go to this website here, accounts.zafira.com, and sign up and then just say that you're interested in joining the serials team, and then we will inform you on when we're meeting next so you can get introduced to the team. I also would love not just questions about anything I've talked about today, but any recommendations that you all may have about getting involved. So if you have any yourself, please do include those in the chat. Before we get to questions, I'd just like to wrap up with those references that I mentioned in the beginning of the presentation. So here are just 4 of many resources that you can find online that provide a lot more detail about what I've been talking about today. And they're all linked here in the slides, so if you'd like to get to them, then you can just download those from the ELEX website. And then lastly, I'd just like to give a few acknowledgments to the people that have participated in getting the information that I needed to put this together and helped me with the examples. So now I'd like to work with Holly to get your questions answered.
Thank you, Gloria, for your interesting presentation. It was really interesting to hear about BibFrame from a serials perspective. If you have any questions for Gloria, please enter them into the questions box. We do already have some questions. Gloria, can you talk a little bit about in the change from the BibFrame 1.0 model to the 2.0 model, are there any changes that are specific to serials or that have some implications for serials that we should think more about?
So particular changes from 1.0 from 2.0, there are quite a few, and that's what both the pre-existing concert group and the PCC group and Zafira's alumni team have looked into. But I would say one of the biggest changes is the inclusion of item. So now the model includes the item level that can be used to track all of the item level data, and so things like the frequency and chronology attached to that item data is something that was not included in 1.0, and so in 2.0 that gives a lot more options for describing serials and lots of other materials, but serials in depth. So that's just one, but I would definitely recommend that if you're interested in the specific changes in BibFrame 2.0 that you visit the Library of Congress's specifications website. And so they've published all of the original thinking in those specifications, and I do believe there is also some of the feedback that they've got from others is publicly available as well on those specifications.
Thank you. We have another question. Can you give any examples where Press.00 was used rather than BibFrame?
So that's a great question, and I wish I would have dug up one of those examples. I know that there were several areas, but if it's okay, then I can kind of look for that example afterwards and then attach that example and responses on the ELEX website.
Great. Okay, so we'll share that out along with the recording. As for Zafira's training alumni serials team, is there also a training team for just basic monograph training? And if so, could an account be requested and join the conversation as a first initial step to get to know the BibFrame editor?
Yeah, so that's a great question. There currently are two teams from the alumni group, and that's the assessment team, so they go through and assess the publication of linked data, and then there's the serials team. And so both of those teams were created by alumni members, and so if you're interested in looking for other people who may be interested in working on a team with you or just getting access to the training, the alumni group in general does have monthly question answer meetings where people can come in and ask any questions that may have come up for them. And so I would say that's a good place to start. So if that's the case, when you go to a request an account, then you can just say you're interested in joining the alumni group and you focus on monographs and would like to find others focused on that type of thing. I'll see that note, so whatever you put in there, I'll be able to follow up and contact you.
Great, thank you. When you showed the NLM records, they appeared to be in a discovery system. What was that, and is it something we can go back and look at?
Sure, I can go back to those slides. 1 second. It kind of hops back to them. So that interface that you were looking at is not a discovery interface. It is just the data pages from the Library Link Network. So let me go back into presenter view. Okay. Yeah. So what you're seeing here is just the base page, and then it goes into all of the other data pages, and it's basically a transformed linked data displayed for human viewing, but underneath is also all of the RDF in RDFA format that's embedded on the page. So it is machine readable linked data, but these pages that I included in my presentation are just a little bit more human friendly. So that's just an index of data that links to all of the pages that include more linked data.
Okay, so we can't see your slides right now, but just to...
Oh, hold on 1 second. I see. Hold on one
All
second.
right. Just to clarify, though, this isn't a live discovery thing that we can go to a web page and see. It's just screenshots for your slides.
Right, they are
Okay.
screenshots. Can you
Okay.
see my,
We
hold
saw
on.
it briefly, but it looks like it went away again. Okay, you see it now.
Let's see. There we go. So now you can, okay, so these are screenshots, and then for this presentation I just did like a quick prototype, so it's not live and published on the web.
Okay.
But I can give some follow-up links because there's other places that do have data like this published, and you can go see that today, so I'll include those in my follow-up.
Great, thank you. Have you had to rethink the definition of a work for serials? So such as, you know, the work as the serial itself and each article as a work. Can you talk a little bit more about those relationships in terms of the model?
Sure. So that is like a great example of the type of thing being focused on in the activity groups that I talked about. But right now, we have used a few different ways to aggregate these things, and serials does give plenty of reason to rethink the definition of work, but I think that's something that serials has kind of pushed even way before linked data. So as every new technology that impacts serials, like when electronic publications came around, or even serials on CD-ROM, people were really starting to rethink our perspective of what is a work, especially when it pertains to a series. And so I think that the conversations taking place in the BibFrame environment are just kind of the next step in the evolution of those. But I know as published in the prototype, I was defining each member as a work, and then defining a work for the entire series as well.
Okay. We have a few more questions about BibFrame 2.0. Do you anticipate significant changes in your tentative models with BibFrame when BibFrame 2.0 comes out in terms of Zephyra's models?
Oh yeah, so some changes that we've included are like the item part of the model, and we're looking at other ways like the title changes and things like that. There has been changes. So 2.0 is technically, you know, it's already out. You can go view the vocabulary. It hasn't been tested to the extent that 1.0 was before those changes, so it's kind of in like an evolving state. And so we've been able to incorporate some changes while testing others before bringing them into production, but the goal is to really align what Zephyra does with 2.0 as much as possible. And so when Library of Congress starts their second pilot, that will also be very helpful in aligning those things.
Okay, and a somewhat related question, has the Zephyra BibFrame vocabulary been updated to match BibFrame 2.0?
So not completely. It has, so like I mentioned, item and other things like that, so it has some elements, but it doesn't have all of them. But what we had done previously was worked to put it in line with 1.0, and that's what the serials team was doing before 2.0 was released. So we still have to go through and do all of that work, but because we refresh libraries monthly and biweekly, we're able to kind of integrate it a piece at a time.
Okay. Regarding interoperability, in a e-resources environment, a lot of our information about serials comes from content providers, either directly or via knowledge bases. Has Zephyra or anyone else you're aware of done any experimentation with transforming KBART files or other non-MARC serials metadata into BibFrame? And have there been conversations with publishers about this?
There has been conversations with publishers, and we've done some experimental work for both publishers and then like data service providers, so places where people would get their MARC data. And the interoperability of BibFrame as it's defined, like kind of in, so for one example would be those the the chronology information or the enumeration information that I went into detail about. Some providers have data formats that already have that defined granularly, and so it's things that the library never really gets. They just put it into the MARC record themselves. But if BibFrame had more granularity for serials, then some of those some of that type of data could be directly received from providers, and the library could get that directly. So as people continue to focus on serials and the vocabulary improves, I think that there's a lot of opportunity for libraries to have data that's more interoperable with what service providers are already use, like proprietary things that are on their end.
Okay. So we have time for one more question. Can you talk a little bit more about how local holdings statements are expressed in BibFrames and what tools are available in Scribe or the BibFrame editor for managing holdings at different levels, and again in terms of interoperability, how those might maybe be transmitted to other entities that the library needs to share serials holdings with, like resource sharing providers?
Mm-hmm. So that's a great question, and in general, BibFrame, just like it's working to address special communities like serials, cataloging, and things like that, is working to address holdings right now. So there's communities looking at that, and the addition of item into the vocabulary is a good addition. But let me see, I might be able to go back to one slide, but the local holdings notes in BibFrame, I believe, would be defined as notes, so they may not be addressed to the best ability, but I don't think I have a specific example of that, but I do know that all of the examples that I kind of went over today were more like from the bibliographic record, and so I can't speak to the local notes precisely, but I can, I'll be happy to go back and talk to others like Shelley or other people, and if I can get a better answer, then I can include that in my responses.
Okay, thank you. So if we didn't get to your questions, we will follow up with Gloria and send any additional answers out with the recording. So thank you, everybody. We're glad that you could be with us today. You'll soon receive an email with a link to the recording, slides, and a short evaluation form. And so please take a few minutes to complete the evaluation. We value your comments, and they help the LX Continuing Education Committee plan future events. The email will also include a certificate of attendance and information on how to get a digital badge. Thanks to Wanda Jazzieri and Catherine Beinecke from the LX Continuing Education Committee and Megan Doherty from the LX Office for technical support. The support they provide makes it possible for us to present these webinars smoothly. We have several upcoming webinars. Please join us next week for Linked Data Cataloging Workflows, the 6th and final webinar of the series from MARC to BibFrame. We will end the fall session with webinars on budget transparency and research data management. We also offer web courses, which are 4 to 6 weeks long, and e-forums, which are 2-day email discussions. You'll find more information on the LX website. We hope you will participate in other LX continuing education offerings again in the future. This concludes our session. Thank you for joining us.